Chapter 6. The waves were frequent and higher than Stu liked. At least there weren't any menacing cloud banks in the distance. He called the USCG to alert them to the sinking trawler, but hadn't radioed again to update them. He'd wait until he had Jenna and Martin back aboard before he did anything else. They had a good view of Hadley's Hope as the sea finally took it down. He'd no doubt someone would scout the wreck at some point in the future. Or maybe the USCG would send a drone down to determine what happened. Stu didn't need an investigation. Someone redlined the engine for too long, and it overheated. They probably had something flammable nearby, and it somehow caught fire or exploded. Either that or a hand grenade had been handy. Why did you do that to the engine? It didn't matter. The trawler was gone, and all he had to do now was skirt the rising oil slick and pluck Jenna and Martin from the ocean. As Stu brought the boat around, a cloud moved across the sun, and the sea turned to slate. The bright orange dinghy stood out against the waves, Jenna and Martin barely rowing at all. Slackers, Stu thought with a grin. Wilma, as soon as we finish this turn, I'm going to back the boat up, okay? Okay. Then, he continued, I need you to climb down to the swim deck and get ready to catch their line. Pull them in. Got it? She nodded but looked unsure of herself. It'll be easy. Just keep your back against the stern and you'll be fine. Okay, she said again, a little more confident. Then you can yell at your best friend for being an idiot. Nope, she said. That's your job. My job is to say, I'm so glad you're alive. Otherwise, she'll get snippy. Stu rolled his eyes. She was probably right. Get a life jacket, too. The oil slick was growing. If a helicopter flew over the area, it'd be easy to see where Hadley's Hope had gone down. Stu sighed. He didn't know what had happened there, but it must have been bad. She said they had jellies in their nets, he thought. What kind? But he knew what kind. It was obvious, wasn't it? They had already traveled a dozen nautical miles from last night's position, so shouldn't they be out of the dead zone by now? Or had the storm pushed the jellies this far northeast? There had been thousands of them last night, he thought. Maybe tens of thousands. Were they following the tide and heading inland? He shivered at the thought of Galveston Bay pulsating with blue lights. How many swimmers would die in that? He finally managed to turn the boat and aim the stern directly at the dinghy. Okay, Wilma, get ready to climb down. She stepped to the gunwale, placed her foot in the first step, and turned her head to him as if waiting for a hand signal. The engines growled as he put them in reverse, and the water churned behind the boat. In just another few minutes, he'd have them aboard. Okay, get ready. Jenna was tired. Her hangover had mostly disappeared, but all she wanted was to crawl into her cabin and take a nap. Fat chance. They still had to get aboard Dream and sail away from here as fast as they could. Any amount of distance would make her feel better. The utter terror etched into the faces of the men wouldn't leave her. The image of the second man who'd been burned and the way his eyes had been scrunched shut in agonizing pain kept flashing in her mind. What had happened? Had he been trying to fix the engine and something caught fire? Maybe he was trying to burn something else. But the burns hadn't killed him. What had? And why the vinegar? Had her mother treated her jelly stings with vinegar? Or had it been some other household product? Jenna couldn't remember. She'd only been 8 or 9 when she'd been stung badly by moon jellies off the Florida Keys. While snorkeling near a large brain coral, she turned without thinking and run right into several of the creatures. Their tentacles burned her arms and legs before she could get away from the small school. She managed to surface and lay on her back screaming, while her father quickly swam to her like he was being chased by a shark. He'd taken them both to shore, her mother meeting them with the boat's dinghy, a bottle of something in one hand, a box of something in the other. What had it been? She was almost certain it had been baking soda, but was the other vinegar? Maybe it was. You were trying to stop the stingers, she said to herself. That made sense. But how had he been stung? And when? Why weren't you helping the guy upstairs? Was he already dead? Good question, and one she'd never have the answer to. You think Stu is going to take us straight home? Martin asked. Jenna fought a smile. Ready to get off the ocean? Hell yes. I don't want to fish. I sure as shit don't want to swim. I'm ready to go home. He smiled, but she knew he was serious. Look at it this way. Some people come back to shore with fish stories. You'll have a ship story. And blue lights. Lots and lots of blue lights. That's right, she chuckled. The good cheer died in her throat as she remembered the jellies spread across the sorting table. Stu had asked if they were the same jellies they'd seen last night. Were they? She hadn't been kidding when she said they all looked the same once they were out of the water. But now that she thought about it, the tentacles had appeared identical. However, she didn't remember them having barbs. Had she simply not noticed them last night? Or were those different jellies? Does it matter? Something had killed those men, and she was willing to bet the jellies were the cause. Were they more venomous than normal? That was an unsettling thought. If they were, the boat had been floating in a sea of venom last night and probably still was, which would mean the things were all around them, floating and swimming somewhere over 100 feet below. That didn't exactly give her a warm and fuzzy. She and Martin were still out here on the ocean, and while there was a current, they were in no danger of capsizing. They were about as safe as they could be for the moment. "People eat jellies," Martin said absently. "Sushi," Jenna agreed. "Ever had it?" "Fuck no. I won't even eat sashimi." She giggled at that. She and Stu loved sushi, but neither was adventurous enough to try jellies or anemones. Even they had their limits. "I could go for a beer right now," Martin said. "Or maybe something a lot stronger." "We've got you covered there. Plenty of whiskey and tequila on board. Just pick your poison." "Good. This hangover is still killing me." "Then why'd you come along? You could have stayed with the boat." "No, I couldn't. Stu wasn't going to let you go over alone, and you weren't going to let us leave until you made sure no one needed help." They needed help, all right, she thought. Just a few hours earlier. Maybe more. She doubted they could have helped the two men much, especially not the one that tried to blow himself up, or whatever it was he was doing. The other? Burn bandages and salve weren't going to heal that. The man had been seriously burned by the tentacles and hit with those barbs. If they were venomous, he'd been a goner the moment he hit the deck. What must it have been like to open that net and have all those dangerous jellies spill out? Why hadn't they simply thrown the net overboard again and released them all? Were they that desperate for fish? Dead zone. No fish here except maybe cat sharks and other bottom feeders. As big as the jellies were, she wondered if a cat shark would be prey for them or a predator. In the ocean, size mattered. A large fish like a great white would have a mean buffet here in the dead zone, assuming it could breathe the low concentration of dissolved oxygen. "Stu's taking his sweet time," Martin said. Jenna's dream was moving closer, but the waves continued pushing the dinghy away. "Well, he'll be here soon enough," she said, doing her best to sound confident. In truth, she was getting more and more anxious about being out here. "Come on, Stu," she whispered to the light breeze. Jenna's dream continued moving toward them, the engines growling a little louder now. The dinghy started to turn from the waves. She put her paddle in the water to reorient them and hit something squishy. Frowning, she peered overboard and saw blue light descending beneath the water before disappearing into darkness. "Shit, Martin, start rowing for the boat." "Wait, he's moving toward us. Why?" "Row!" she yelled and plunged her paddle into the water. She took a large stroke as Martin moved to take his first. On her third stroke, her paddle blade slapped into something pliable. Martin made a disgusted sound and lifted his paddle from the water. Seaweed-like tentacles had wrapped around the end, and a moment later they began to pull. He swayed toward the edge of the gunwale before yanking hard and leaning backward. The tentacles tore free, one flying right past Jenna's ear. Jenna screeched in surprise before finding her paddle fouled in the same manner. "Hurry up!" she shouted at the dream, while she and Martin paddled as fast as they could, each desperately trying to untangle their paddle. A line of tentacles crawled up Martin's, and he lifted it before smashing it down hard on the water's surface. White foam sprayed upward along with a splash of droplets. He slammed it down again, and this time, Jenna heard the wet, squelchy thwap of the paddle striking a jelly's body. Several feet away, water swelled as a large jelly turned over, its tentacles flipping like a cat o' nine tails through the air. Jenna yelped and tried to brandish her entangled paddle like a sword. Another jelly rose next to Martin, and he bashed it before it could flip over. She wasn't sure, but she thought the creature had been at least 3 feet across. "Paddle!" Jenna shouted to him. Martin stuck his paddle in and began taking long strokes. She fought against the jellies that kept trying to wrap up her paddle, each stroke bumping and thumping against bodies she couldn't see. She saw that only 15 yards separated them from Dream. "Row!" she shouted again. Wilma climbed down the steps and held out her hands as if trying to catch a ball that hadn't yet been thrown. Jenna got the message. She smacked 2 smaller jellies rising to the surface on her starboard side, checked for others, and then dropped the paddle. She lifted the dinghy's line and tossed it to Wilma. The line fell short and hit the water at Wilma's feet. Cursing, Jenna pulled the rope back in. She barely heard Martin's paddle smacking and bashing rising jellies. By the time she gathered the line to throw it again, Stu had goosed the engines and stopped Dream's aft momentum. Wilma was only 5 yards away. Jenna tossed the line once more, and this time her friend caught it. Wilma pulled the line hand over hand, the dinghy moving slowly toward her. Martin yelled, and his paddle blade smashed into the water. Jenna saw several tentacles rise from the ocean as a translucent, glowing body flipped over. A long, stringy tentacle rolled out and extended like a massive tongue, slapping against Martin's arm. He shrieked in pain and disgust and batted it away. Wilma pulled the dinghy closer to the swim deck. Now they were only a yard away. With 2 plunges of the paddle, the dinghy's stern clipped the swim deck. "Get out!" Jenna yelled at Martin. He dropped the paddle and crouch-walked until he could step out of the boat and onto the swim deck, one arm cocked at a strange angle. Jenna jumped out of the boat to the swim deck just as Martin's paddle, still entwined in tentacles, tumbled out of the boat and into the water. It floated there for a moment before more tentacles wrapped around it and pulled it beneath the waves. "Martin!" Wilma yelled and put her arms around him. He groaned in pain and lightly pushed her away. "I need something for my arm. Fuck!" "Stu!" Jenna yelled. "Get the first aid kit." "On it!" Stu yelled down. "Can you get up the steps?" Jenna asked Martin. He groaned between his teeth and hissed in pain. "I think so." He turned and climbed while muttering curses. "Your turn," Jenna said to Wilma, and gestured to the steps. Wilma didn't need to be told twice. She quickly climbed while Jenna pulled the dinghy in and resecured it. One paddle was gone, the motor didn't work, and now the tiny boat was damn near useless unless they wanted to get attacked by sea jellies. Jenna saw something move to port and turned in that direction. Another jelly had flipped in the water, its tentacles rolling over as if searching for prey. A second or two later, another did the same. "Fuck this," she said, and climbed the steps to the main deck. Chapter 7. Stu killed the engines and dropped the anchor. When Jenny yelled for him to get the first aid kit, he sprinted into the cockpit and grabbed the large one. By the time he got back on deck, Martin had climbed over the railing. He held his left forearm as though it were broken. "Sit down," Stu said, and pointed at the bench near the console. Martin collapsed on it and held out his arm. Stu nearly stepped away from him. A winding stripe of skin had peeled away from the dermis, the flesh beneath raw and bleeding. Several puncture wounds covered his forearm, as though he'd been hit with a board full of nails. Blood welled from the wounds, and the skin around them had already begun to swell. A moment later, Martin looked as though his arm had been stung by a nest of hornets. Stu opened the medical kit and unzipped the compartment with the word "Burns" emblazoned on its front. After donning a pair of nitrile gloves, he found the blister gel, popped the top, and began smearing the goop onto Martin's arm. Martin screamed in pain before clamping his jaw shut and whimpering. Stu kept saying, "I'm sorry," under his breath, with each muted gasp. A few seconds later, Martin wiped tears from his eyes and whispered, "Better." Stu grinned. Wilma squatted next to the bench. "Is he okay?" she asked. "I'm better," Martin said. "Whatever that shit is made it stop stinging so bad." Stu squinted at the bottle. Lidocaine and aloe vera gel, good for burns, blisters, and a numb tongue. "Don't want to know how you know that," Wilma muttered, and squeezed Martin's good arm. "Can I get you something?" "Water," Martin said. "Throat's gone all dry." "Got it," she said, and disappeared into the cockpit. "Stu," Jenna called from behind them. "You need help?" He shook his head without turning around and reached for the burn dressings. "We got him smeared down with burn cream. Going to put the bandages on next." "Good," Jenna said. He was silent for a moment while he removed the first dressing from its package. "Do we have any vinegar?" she asked. He raised an eyebrow. "Hell of a time to ask that. Why?" "I don't know," she said. "Just remember my mother using it on me for jelly stings, and one of the guys had a bottle of it in his hand." "What guys?" Martin and Stu asked at the same time. "Yeah," Wilma said, coming out of the cockpit with several bottles of water in her hands. Jenna sighed. "I found 2 dead men, one in the galley and another in the head. The first guy?" She shook her head. "He had what looked like porcupine quills sticking out of his cheeks, and a jelly was wrapped around his arm." Around his arm? Martin asked, wincing as Stu applied the first bandage.
Right, Jenna said nervously. Looked like he'd been tearing at his skin, too. With what? Wilma asked. His nails, Jenna said flatly. She didn't want to be telling this story anymore. In fact, the more she remembered, the more she wanted to break down into tears. But what killed him? Stu asked. Don't know. What about the second guy? Wilma asked. Jenna breathed deeply and exhaled slowly. She took a bottle of water from Wilma and spun the cap. He'd been burned badly, like from fire. Half of one arm was, I guess, third-degree burns, but he'd also been stung badly. I don't know what killed him either. No, she didn't. All she knew was that they both died in terrible pain. She looked away from Martin, suddenly unable to meet his eyes. Stu applied another bandage to the raw welts. The burn pads had already begun to turn a dull red from the welling blood. No one else? Stu asked. Didn't see anyone else, no. How many jellies, you figure? She shrugged and took a long draught. A few dozen, more. Some were small and others more than 2 feet in diameter. Jesus, Martin said. Same ones? I think so. You and I both saw their bodies glow blue before they surfaced. They have to be the same ones from last night. Wilma looked at Stu. I thought you got us out of the dead zone. He shrugged. I don't know how large it is. For all we know, this stretches for another 10 miles. Or we're actually out of it and these fuckers followed us. Followed us? Jenna asked. That trawler's been there at least since the storm. Those guys have been dead for a while, or they're decaying really fast. The words tumbled out of her mouth and struck the group quiet. Jenna realized the implication of what she'd said and blushed. What I mean is that we found them like that and we were sailing toward them. Therefore the jellies were already here. She's got a point, Wilma said. Stu sighed and wiped at his brow. Guess it doesn't matter, though. Trawler's gone now. Jenna nodded and suddenly had the urge to weep for those strangers. She hadn't known them, obviously, but she doubted they deserved to die like that. She wasn't sure anyone did. How you feeling, Martin? Wilma asked. He managed a grin. Just aches now. No longer stings. Good, Stu said. The stuff is working, I guess. He turned to Jenna. I think we hoist the sails and get moving. I think our little trip should come to an end. Agreed. I've had enough of this. Wilma? Martin? Stu asked. Take me the fuck home, Martin said, pumping his fist. Stu mocked a salute. I'll make it happen. You alert the CG? Jenna asked. Yeah, they'll mark it as a wreck and that'll be that. Apart from wanting to talk to us in person. He sighed. Never good when they want to talk to you in person. Jenna snickered. I told Martin instead of a fish story, he'll have a boat story. She glanced at Martin. No one will believe you. He leaned back on the bench, eyes half closed. Doesn't matter, he said. I might have scars that prove it. Stu headed back to the wheel and weighed anchor. With that done, he raised the sails. The anemic breeze barely made them flutter, meaning they'd only get up to 2 or 3 knots, but he could fix that. It was time to get the hell out of Dodge. The breeze did little to get them moving. The best Stu could do was 2 knots without the engine, hardly at cruising speed. He started the engines and goosed the throttle to 1/3. Jenna's Dream slowly chugged through the water, and their speed rose to 3 knots. Better, he thought. Martin was still sitting on the bench and drinking water. Wilma sat close to him, and the pair were chatting, their conversation lost beneath the sound of the engines. Jenna appeared from the cockpit with a steaming mug, and Stu groaned. More coffee. In truth, he didn't feel tired exactly, but the caffeine would be nice. She handed him the mug and smiled. Figured you might need a pick-me-up. No whiskey this time? Jenna shook her head. Not now. Maybe later. First, you have to get us the hell out of here. He nodded and pushed the throttle to half. The boat slowly picked up speed. We're doing 4 knots now, he said. If we get more of a breeze, we can probably make 6. She bit her lip before saying, No way to go faster? He furrowed his brow at her. What's wrong? I just want to get away from here. I know, he said, trying to imagine what she must have seen. She described it, sure, but he had a feeling it was much worse than she'd let on. He'd seen her concerned before, but never frightened. I'll do my best to get us home as quickly as I can. I know you will. Just let me know what I can do to help. Get out and push, he joked. She punched him in the arm. You know what I mean. I'm more than happy to take the wheel for a while. Now that I have some coffee, he said, raising the mug, I should be good for a few more hours. Okay. Want to talk about it? She didn't say anything for a few beats, her eyes drifting out to sea. Stu knew from long experience it was best not to rush her. I didn't see the first dead man when I walked into the cockpit. The cooler door was wide open and blocked my view of him. She paused a moment. The second I saw his face, how locked in pain it was, I knew he was dead. She sniffled back a tear. The same with the other one. He remained quiet, seemingly focused on driving the boat rather than listening to her. The jellies were awful, she said in a low voice. Their tentacles draped over the sorting table, bodies all squished together, fluids still draining from their sun-rotting corpses. But the men were worse, she said softly. So much worse. She went silent again and Stu pushed the throttle to 3/4 speed. He didn't want to hold it there for more than an hour, but like her, he wanted out of the dead zone as soon as possible. Jenna swallowed hard and took a shuddering breath. Whatever killed them, they died in excruciating pain. Stu met her gaze before she turned away again. He thought he saw tears in her eyes. I'm sorry, he said softly and put a hand on her shoulder. She grabbed his hand and sidled to him, putting her other arm around his waist. They kissed for a long moment before she pulled away. Thank you. You're welcome, although I don't know for what. Just being you. As she finished speaking, Stu heard Martin and Wilma talking excitedly about something, but he couldn't catch more than a word or two. Maybe they were having a lover's quarrel, or maybe she was telling him he was an idiot to have volunteered. Shit, so had Jenna. But that was over and done now. Stu didn't care if they found 4 or 5 more abandoned boats. He wasn't stopping. They'd done their Good Samaritan duty for the day, maybe for the year. He wasn't risking anyone else in the water, no matter how stable the dinghy was. I'm going to make lunch, Jenna said and kissed him again. With that, she headed into the cockpit. Stu sighed and sipped from the mug. He frowned in distaste at first before taking another sip. A grin lit his face. He normally didn't have much sweetener in his coffee, but she'd laced it with real sugar. Must really want me awake, he thought. The boat's engines groaned and stuttered momentarily, and Stu glanced at the gauges. Everything was green, and he was well below the red line. Oil pressure was good, and so was the battery. A moment later, the engines groaned again, and the prop RPMs dropped. He set the throttle to half, engaged the autopilot, and walked to the stern. One look at the ocean told him the problem. Jellies. Bits of the creatures were spread out behind them like a trail of mucus-covered giblets. The props were running into the creatures, and the churn was slowing them. How many must be down there to foul the props? Stu quickly ran back to the wheel, turned off the autopilot, and increased the throttle back to 3/4. The engines slowly settled back into a normal rhythm. What was that? Wilma called to him. Stu shook his head, not really wanting to have this conversation. If he told her that the jellies were fucking up the props, he thought she'd panic. That was the last goddamn thing he needed. He wiped a sheen of sweat from his brow and activated the fish finder. The display returned a solid layer of green. Oh shit, he said softly. They were floating atop a field of jellies 10 feet below them. More appeared to be rising. What are you doing? He asked the dots on the screen. The props ground again, and the boat shuddered. Jenna appeared from the cockpit, a concerned look on her face. She quickly made her way to him and glanced at the gauges. That didn't sound good. The props didn't like it, Stu agreed. Don't tell the others, but I think we're surrounded by the jellies. Shit, she said softly. Are we grinding bodies back there? Yep, and there's nothing we can do except shut off the engines. She shook her head. We do that, we only got the breeze. Very true. The props finished grinding and chewing their way through a mound of jellies and found their normal cadence. Stu exhaled slowly and managed a grin. Then again, maybe we'll just plow through them. Jenna didn't return the smile. Don't get cocky. Just how many do you think you can run through before the engines give out? That was a good question. Was he damaging the drive shaft and the props every time he ran through another dozen bodies? The props made a grinding noise and a yellow light appeared on the console. Fuck me. He dropped the throttle to 1/4. This isn't good.
The grinding noise continued, and the yellow light turned red. He put the engines in neutral and waited. After a few seconds, the light turned yellow and then disappeared.
"What just happened?" she asked.
"Something's wound around the props," he said. "They started slipping. Can't keep pushing them."
"What the hell could be on the props?"
She was silent for a moment.
"You think they're tentacles?"
"Have to be a lot of them, but it's possible, I guess."
"What can we do?"
"Apart from diving down there and untangling the mess, not a lot." She rubbed her hands against her arms as though suddenly cold.
"I'd say that's a big no fucking way."
"Got that right," he said, killing the engines. Wilma stood up from the bench and walked to them.
"Shit,"
Jenna said and turned to face her, a forced smile on her face.
"Ready for lunch?" "Sure, but why'd you turn off the engines? And what was that sound?"
"A little engine trouble," Stu said. "Just need to give things a bit of a rest. Breeze should be picking up soon anyway." He hated lying to Wilma, but couldn't afford to have her panic. Wilma didn't look satisfied.
"Is that all?"
"Might be something wound around the props," he said. "No reason to worry, though. USCG is only 30 to 40 minutes out if we need them."
"That's comforting," she said. "Be more comforting if you hadn't said that."
Stu rolled his eyes. "My point is that we have food, water,
and booze,"
Jenna offered. "And that," Stu continued, "and are in no danger of sinking. Once the breeze picks up, we'll start making 4 to 6 knots and we'll be well clear of this place."
"How's Martin?"
Jenna asked. Wilma shrugged.
"Pain seems to be managed. Says it itches."
"Not surprised," Stu said. "We'll change the dressing in a while and I can put some more salve on it. That should help."
"Good. Now, about lunch?"
"Come on," Jenna said, putting her hand on Wilma's shoulder.
"Let's get some sandwiches and drinks out here."
Stu sipped from his mug while he watched them head into the cockpit. He cast a glance toward Martin and wasn't surprised to see the man looked as though he'd fallen asleep. Good for him. If not for the drink, Stu would want a nap. Shit, even with the drink, he wanted to go to sleep. Get this horrible, awful day over with. But not before he got them away from the jellies. Stu dropped his eyes to the fish finder. The thick layer of jellies was still there. If anything, the morass had thickened rather than thinned. It was as if the entire herd, school, pod, whatever you wanted to call them, was moving right along with the boat, both pacing them and outrunning them at the same time. Now you're being paranoid, he told himself. Based on what he'd seen since last night, he damned well had the right to be, but jellies didn't think. Box jellies hunted, yes, but they went after small fish and plankton, not boats 40 times their size. Just keep sailing, he told himself.